Kia ora, I'm Rob McDonald, Chair of Contact Energy, one of New Zealand's leading renewable energy companies. A major theme for the APEC CEO Summit is the future of energy. New forms of clean energy will be critical to a sustainable, low-carbon future as we transition away from legacy infrastructure and disrupt traditional methods of producing, storing and consuming energy. How can Asia-Pacific economies be encouraged to move faster towards affordable, reliable, sustainable and modern energy? At Contact Energy, we believe that responding to the spectre of climate change is the biggest energy and infrastructure challenge we will face in our lifetimes. But wrapped up in the challenge are fantastic opportunities too. For example, here in New Zealand, we can become a trailblazer in the emergence of new global industries, such as green hydrogen, that can play an important role in contributing to emissions reduction goals. The benefits that can follow include economic activity in the form of investment and jobs, reduced emissions in parts of the economy where such reductions are expected to be fraught, delivering a greener electricity grid and punching above our weight as we help overseas economies wean themselves off their heavy reliance on fossil fuels. Around 2/3 of global carbon emissions are energy related and emanate from electricity, heat and transport. Driving these emissions down via renewable electrification is widely accepted as the key method for delivering reductions. Today, the focus is on transport. The transport sector is one of the largest users of energy and contributes significant economic, social and environmental impacts. Robyn Denholm from Tesla will be speaking to us today about how the future of energy, the challenges and the opportunities she sees and what can be accomplished by 2030. Robyn will discuss how we're past the tipping point in the renewable energy transformation and enormous opportunities it provides to the APEC region's economies. Robyn joined the board of Tesla in 2014 as an independent director and chair of the audit committee, and she was appointed chair in November 2018. Her global experience encompasses leadership roles across a wide range of technology companies, including Telstra, Juniper Networks and Sun Microsystems. In her time at Telstra, Robyn served as Chief Financial Officer, Head of Strategy and Chief Operations Officer. Please welcome Robyn Denholm.
Thank you for that warm introduction. Kia ora, everyone. I'm joining you today from across the Tasman Sea in Sydney, on the land of the Gadigal people, and I pay my respects to their elders and to their inspiring young people who are so often leading on tackling climate change. As COP26 concludes in Glasgow, we are all reminded of the urgency of the climate challenge we face. The good news is we are past the tipping point of a renewable energy transformation, and we already have the technologies needed to succeed. But we must now accelerate the deployment of them at an incredible pace. And that's what I've been asked to speak to you about today. The future of energy, its challenges and opportunities, and what I believe we can accomplish by 2030. The countries of APEC represent about 60% of the global energy usage, and the Pacific is very vulnerable to natural disasters that are worsened by climate change. The rising Pacific is already threatening the very existence of Pacific Island nations. Australia, the US, Canada, Mexico and Russia have all experienced unprecedented wildfires in the last year. And Pacific typhoons and cyclones are already deadly, more deadly, because of the climate change. At Tesla, our mission has always been to accelerate the world's transition to sustainable energy. We are focused on two sectors that result in over 50% of the world's carbon emissions: electricity generation and transport. My key message is that we don't need to wait for new technologies to eliminate carbon pollution in these areas. The technologies exist today. Sunshine, wind and hydro mean that we have plenty of low-cost renewable energy. But of course, it's not always in the right place at the right time. So the critical challenge is storing that abundant renewable energy so that it can power entire electricity grids and huge fleets of vehicles. The lithium-ion battery is the platform for both of these transformations. That's why it's one of the most critical technologies for humanity today. These batteries simply cannot be made without the contributions from almost every country in APEC. Whether it's rare earth minerals, critical minerals, steel, technical and manufacturing excellence, financial instruments and investment, or the talent of our brilliant people. This is a group of innovative, forward-leaning countries committed to working together despite our many differences to open barriers through collaboration and through trade. Both are critical to this race to zero emissions because the new energy era is very international and we will succeed or fail as one. Let me give you a brief update on progress where there is some great news. Firstly, on transport. This year, electric vehicle sales, including plug-in hybrids, have more than doubled around the world. The electric market share increased from 3% in the first half of last year to 6.3% in the first half of this year. Some parts of APEC are progressing fantastic progress, both on sales and on production. For example, in August of this year, 1 in 5 new vehicles sold in China was electric. In Canada, the US and South Korea, electric vehicle sales have hit new record highs this year. And at Tesla, we've been thrilled to enter new markets, including Singapore, with more to come soon. This growth is encouraging, but we are still at the bottom of a steep climb. Today, there are about 1.5 billion cars globally, and 16 million are electric, about 1%. It takes nearly 20 years to turn over the global vehicle fleet, with about 60 to 70 million new vehicles sold each year. The math is pretty simple. To fully decarbonise transport by 2050, we have to stop selling combustion engine vehicles by around 2030 in most places. That's why at Tesla, we are aiming to produce 20 million vehicles each year by 2030. The number one thing that I urge all countries in the APEC region to do is to strengthen emission standards. This fundamentally changes the economics of CO2 pollution and in vehicles, and also gives the industry throughout the supply chain of EVs confidence to invest, knowing that the market is headed towards EVs. Let me give you some evidence behind how emission standards change the pace of EV adoption. Here in Australia, for example, EV uptake is slower than comparable countries, at less than 1% of new vehicle sales last year. Because there are no meaningful national vehicle or emissions standards, we have seen certain state governments starting to lead the way, but without national standards, they face major headwinds. Our host nation, New Zealand, is a great example of leadership. EV sales have rocketed up from about 3% to 12% of new light vehicle sales in just a few months since the New Zealand government introduced a world-class clean car discount scheme earlier this year. In fact, the average fleet emissions of new vehicles in New Zealand is down 15% in just 1 quarter. And the clean car standards before your parliament at the moment will put a Taroa in amongst the cleanest, safest vehicle fleets in the world, and that is decisive leadership. Globally, vehicle manufacturers are turning their focus to electric vehicles. Almost all major players have plans to introduce their own fleets of EVs. this is critical because only electric vehicles can be zero emissions. In Tesla's recent impact report, we analysed the lifetime emissions of electric vehicles compared to fossil fuels. Even in the most carbon-intensive grids, running an electric vehicle like a Model 3 is significantly lower emissions than a comparable combustion engine. Of course, we encourage everyone to charge their vehicles from renewable sources wherever possible. And as grids become increasingly renewable, every vehicle on the road becomes cleaner and greener to run. So let's talk about electricity energy generation. There's also great progress in the renewable uptake in battery storage. As I mentioned, electric vehicles have about doubled this year, but stationary battery storage looks set to triple. Deployments from the year are expected to reach 12 gigawatts and 28 gigawatt hours in 2021. For a very rough estimate, that sense of scale, 12 gigawatts is roughly as much power as it takes for 9 million houses. People often think of batteries as a place to store solar and wind energy when the sun doesn't shine and the wind doesn't blow, but there's so much more that batteries can do. They can provide critical services to the existing grid in the transition to an all-renewable energy grid. The technical capabilities of Tesla software and inbuilt inverters mean that when an aging coal-fired station breaks down on a hot or a freezing day, batteries can quickly and accurately respond and support the grid. Batteries don't sit idle. They are highly flexible, infinitely scalable, with the ability to make revenue for their investors 24/7. Governments and utilities around the world are choosing batteries to lower electricity prices and solve grid stability and reliability issues affordably. As an example, Jae-in and Tesla are currently working together to complete testing on the largest battery in the Southern Hemisphere, located in Victoria, Australia. With increasingly hotter summers, demand for electricity rising at peak times and aging coal-fired generators becoming more unreliable, the Victorian government was looking for additional capacity to safeguard the state's power supply. Rather than build a new gas or coal-fired peaking plant, they decided to install the Victorian Big Battery. The 300 megawatt or 450 megawatt hour Victorian Big Battery will provide Systems Integrity Protection Scheme, SIPS, services in Victoria for over the next decade of Australian summers. There are currently more than 40 big batteries being deployed or planned across Australia, and many more across the APEC region. Grid batteries can have similar benefits in every major energy grid around the world. Importantly, this means that there is simply no reason to build another gas-fired peaking plant ever. They are slower, more expensive to run, and less reliable than batteries, not to mention that they are a massive contributor to the world's CO2 emissions. Batteries have also enabled Pacific countries to transition away from costly, polluting, and often unreliable diesel generators. A few examples include Ta'u Island in American Samoa. Their solar and Tesla battery system allows them to store and use solar energy 24/7. The Hawaiian Islands of Maui and Lanai are on track to be 100% renewably powered with solar, wind, and battery storage. Another very recent example closer to home is Lord Howe Island, a UNESCO World Heritage Site off the east coast of New South Wales. Lord Howe Island relied on diesel generators to supply the island's power. The island has recently transitioned to their solar and Tesla battery system. We are also seeing commercial sites such as manufacturing, warehouses, and even office buildings using renewable energy solutions for their power needs. Not only is it better for the planet by eliminating CO2, but it's also saving these businesses money on their energy costs. On the residential level, the technology is already available to decarbonise the home. Solar and battery installations are on the rise, and that is no surprise given it can save households thousands of dollars a year. Energy retailers are increasingly offering their customers solar and batteries to join virtual power plants, also known as VPPs. VPPs connects a network of homes that have solar and batteries, or sometimes just batteries alone. VPPs ensure that your home is protected by the most efficient source and can also act together like a big battery to support the grid when it's most needed. Add an electric vehicle that you can charge for free off the sun, which I do, and it is a no-brainer. Perhaps it all sounds too easy so far. We have the technologies to solve this problem, and the transition is already accelerating at pace. But I can tell you firsthand that getting this far in batteries and electric vehicles has been incredibly challenging. And we're only at the start. While EVs doubled this year and batteries tripled, that rate of growth needs to not only continue every year, but rapidly increase. Remember that despite all of this progress, only 1% of vehicles on the road around the world are electric, and the International Energy Agency estimates that around a third of the world's electricity will be generated by renewables this year. We also need that to be 100% within 25 years. That's a production challenge, unlike any humanity has managed before. And as I mentioned earlier, it takes dozens of countries to make each battery cell, each solar panel or roof, and each electric vehicle. To meet the world's decarbonisation targets, lithium-ion cell production will have to grow by 23 times their current level by 2035, according to McKinsey's projections. That's an annual growth rate of 37%. APEC countries are clearly key to this. Chile and Australia together supply most of the world's lithium today. Indonesia, the Philippines, and Russia lead on nickel, to name just 2 metals of dozens that go into every cell. In APEC, we have some of the best, most innovative manufacturers in the world, but a production line can only move at the speed of its slowest component. A new nickel or lithium mine and processing facility can take billions of dollars and up to a decade to ramp production. These are huge investments that require very patient and strategic capital. That's why countries whose governments are willing to lead the way by planning and co-investing with businesses are ahead on this front. It is critical that we not only scale the supply chains for the new energy era quickly and in a sustainable way, that the extraction of minerals, but also local refining and battery cell production, because mining and manufacturing must also decarbonise. In the face of this enormous challenge and opportunity, there has never been a more important time for the role of APEC. Not only can none of us tackle this alone, but only together through shared ambition and commitment to cooperation and trade. As the Glasgow conference concludes, let's shift our gaze from targets 30 years into the future and look at concrete actions now. What can APEC leaders do right now that will have maximum impact? Globally, we can only transition to reliable, cost-effective renewables as fast as we can build energy storage. We can only reduce vehicle pollution as fast as we can build electric vehicles, and that is the race. Companies like Tesla are deploying every resource we have at ramping up production. But government leadership is crucial. The supply chains from batteries and vehicles are immense. And as I've just outlined, the required growth in minerals and materials is exponential. This is the time for countries to back their sustainable mining, refining and manufacturing capability. And there are two tangible things that you can leave this conference to do in your own countries. Firstly, give markets certainty and direction by setting clear and ambitious timelines for technology transition. Strong vehicle emission standards now and into the future, not just in 2050 targets, but the next 5 and 10 years are much more important. As leaders, you can invest and underwrite the supply chains for the new energy era. Mining and refining of battery minerals, the manufacturing of solar, wind, batteries and electric vehicles, as well as their component parts. And also ensure that these new supply chains are built with the best environmental and social standards to last for the decades to come. Secondly, prepare your energy grids for major transition. Most energy grids were built for an old model of generation, centralised fossil fuel generators. That's not the present, and it's certainly not the future. Every roof is a generator and the power flows in both directions on the grid. Renewable power is already the cheapest form of new generation, but too often it's blocked by the connection barriers and delays. The answer is a combination of network planning and rapid deployment of battery storage at the household, the commercial level, and also at utility scale. And finally, preserve the commitment to fair and free trade, a commitment that is the foundation stone of APEC, because the future of energy is truly international, and we will succeed or fail as one. Every nation has a critical role to play, from the smallest to the largest. Thanks for your time.
Tēnā rau atu koe te Māori, kura Robyn Denholm, the chair of Tesla Incorporation, and of course addressing there the future energy challenges. Some very good key points she raises, and of course batteries was a huge part of her speech there. The other, of course, is EV vehicles, electric vehicles, and I was quite taken aback hearing that there are 1.5 billion vehicles, but just 1% of that entire, output of vehicles is electric.
1% of the global fleet is electric. Okay, but let's spin it on its head for a moment. So New Zealand hosts APEC every 21 years. Mm-hmm. Imagine, all things going well, what things might look like the next time New Zealand hosts APEC. In 21 years' time, what percentage of the global fleet might be electric? Because we have an enormous opportunity ahead of us, and anyone who has been in a Tesla before, I'm sure would agree that actually making the electric switch can be pretty comfortable from a consumer perspective as well. I was actually, if only this was...
had the luxury of even touching a Tesla, Jack, but I can imagine.
We signed up for the wrong gig. If this was Oprah, we'd be able to look under our chairs right now and
you get a Tesla. No.
Be a made-for-TV moment, maybe.
Absolutely.
No, but...
I like that she said we don't have to wait to eliminate outdated and environmentally harmful electricity generators or sources in order to, flip it on its head and make renewable and environmentally friendly solutions when we're talking about energy. And she says, to fully decarbonise, we must stop selling combustion vehicles. Yeah. But of course, that's not it's easier said than done. I mean, if we're looking at 1.5 billion vehicles across the globe, we have to look at the waste and what do you do with all those vehicles?
Yeah, exactly. And I'm sure we will be looking at the broad spectrum of clean energy solutions in the transportation space, not just at electric vehicles, not just at lithium-ion batteries, but also at the future possibilities that hydrogen presents throughout our energy sector.
Yes, indeed. There is a massive transformation taking place in the energy sector, with new forms of clean energy production and consumption essential to creating a more sustainable, low-carbon future.
To continue our discussion, our kōrero, we have a panel of experts up next who will discuss how the APEC region can lead the rapid changes already underway in the global energy system, and how government and business can work together to develop and deploy new technologies required to accelerate the transition. Moderating this panel discussion is Malcolm Johns, Chief Executive of Christchurch Airport.
Kia ora tātou, everybody, and welcome to our panel discussion on energy transition. The APEC region demands about 60% of the world's energy at the moment, and transitioning that energy from non-renewable to renewable sources is going to be an essential part of meeting our climate change challenges. On the panel today, I'm joined by Sir Stephen Tindall, founder of the Warehouse Group and philanthropist and investor, passionate in sustainability and renewable. Kia ora, Sir Stephen.
Kia ora.
I'm also joined by Li Zhengao, founder and president of Longi Green Energy Technology Company in China, and Dr. Valerie Spieth, managing director of BlackRock, focusing on renewable power and sustainable investing. So, Stephen, I wonder if we might start with you, and I wonder if you might be able to share with us some of the experience you've had in investing in renewables to date.
Yes, certainly. So I started investing in solar probably about 15 years ago, and we now have a solar company that's the largest for actually putting solar on people's roofs, and now they're just starting to do schools and commercial buildings. Then I started to get interested in other forms of energy, and the one that's really taken my fancy is hydrogen. So while that's still quite a long way off, it's something that I've kind of specialised in doing. So I invested in a company in particular in New Zealand. I was the first commercial investor, called LanzaTech, and that took carbon monoxide off the smokestacks of steel mills. In fact, we did it here in New Zealand, and turned it into biofuel. That's now developed into a company that makes jet fuel. And as everybody appreciates, we're going to see short-haul electric planes coming up relatively soon, but the long-haul ones are going to probably have to use hydrogen. So the hydrogen side of it for me, while it's a little way off, I really started to get interested in it. And so we've invested in a company called Haringa. Now, Haringa Energy is next year putting together 4 filling stations here in the North Island of New Zealand, and we're importing 30 of the best hydrogen trucks, and we're starting an industry from scratch to get renewable energy trucks and long-distance transport running here in New Zealand. So that's going to take quite a lot of effort. There's a number of companies who actually see the benefit, even though it's more expensive for them, to actually have their names on the side of hydrogen trucks. There's some commercial benefit for them to do that. In addition, my last position as a chair was chair of Emirates Team New Zealand, our America's Cup team. We just retained the America's Cup earlier this year. Now, we're putting together a fast chase boat. You probably have seen through the America's Cup, the chase boats have 4 enormous petrol engines on them, so they burn a lot of energy. We're going to put together a fuel cell hydrogen chase boat that will do 50 knots foiling. So that's a really exciting achievement for us. Some of the other things that I see is what is happening here in Auckland with the Ports of Auckland. They've joined a global alliance, and they've put in an electrolyser, and they're now supplying hydrogen to Auckland's first hydrogen bus. I've put some money into a company that actually produces electrolysers. In fact, they make them in the UK, and the byproduct is oxygen. So, when you take water and you split it, you get hydrogen and oxygen. So the oxygen is going into oxidation ponds in the UK, and we're bringing down an electrolyser to New Zealand very soon. So there's been a number of things over the years I've got involved in. I've got into water, so taking dirty water and cleaning it up, which does use energy. We have a foundation called the Tyndall Foundation. We had the first electric car in New Zealand. It was an old retrofitted car that we had put together for us in Australia. On top of our building at the Tyndall Foundation, we have solar panels. So I actually, I'm able to power up my EV, a Volkswagen Golf EV from solar. So there's been a number of things that we've been involved in, and it's been very exciting. I think the big thing though for APEC is that somehow we're going to have to really accelerate this. Because these things are very early days, unless there's a real commitment by governments and private enterprise. I mean, I'm a small player. I've got Mitsui involved with us in the Haringa project. They're a big player, but we need enormous players. And Fortescue, for example, a big Australian player out of West Australia, are looking very, very hard at doing hydrogen here in New Zealand. And I know that one of the next speakers from Contact Energy, along with Meridian Energy, looking at when the aluminium smelter gets converted down in the South Island, whether we can make a whole lot of hydrogen from there. And in terms of APEC, what that actually provides is an export market for New Zealand, but the ability for other APEC countries to be able to take the hydrogen and put it into their vehicles. So it's all very, very exciting.
And it's very clear to see your passion in that area as you speak about hydrogen. And I'm looking forward to seeing that foiling 50-knot boat in recreational areas of New Zealand as it becomes production orientated. Mr. Lee, I wonder if I might turn to you. You're passionate about solar. You're very involved globally in the acceleration of solar as part of the energy transition. I wonder if you have a view on how the APEC region might accelerate using solar.
Okay. The energy is crucial to Asia-Pacific economic growth. As carbon neutrality became the shared consensus of the Asia-Pacific and the world, renewable energy, including solar energy, is playing an important role in addressing climate change and energy transition. And we are proud that over the past 10 years, with the lowered cost of solar power and innovation, in most countries in the world, solar has become the cheapest source of energy. And meanwhile, like North Australia, Northwest China, and Chile are abundant in solar energy resources. And we believe the rich solar energy resources can support the energy transition in Asia-Pacific. And also, the solar manufacturing can also contribute to Asia-Pacific economic recovery. For example, over 90% of the world's solar products are produced in Asia-Pacific and creating millions of jobs in Asia-Pacific. And in addition to China, Southeast Asia has also become an important hub for solar manufacturing. At the same time, the solar industry is pushing for clean manufacturing, that is, make clean energy using clean energy sources or solar for solar process. And we believe solar manufacturing is now shifting to clean energy rich regions, including Chile, Australia, and New Zealand. And this shift will push forward energy transition and strengthen the manufacturing in these regions as well. And thus power economic growth of this region. Thank you for your question.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. Dr. Spieth, you have a vast fund available for investing in renewable energy in our region. And I wonder if you could talk a little bit about the priorities of that fund and how that might help accelerate the energy transition to renewable energy in the APEC region.
Sure, very happy and honored to be here today. So I think one thing to say is for sure that there's no issue at the moment ranking higher on our clients' list than climate change. And I think like this climate change, even though there might be a lot of challenges, is an historic investment opportunity. So all developed and developing countries, they're following different decarbonization paths. And these are based on their stages of economic development. So some of them are greening their current existing power portfolio. Other ones, they have additional demand from electrification, population growth, or even consumer growth. And what we have seen is that in the last years, only for emerging markets, the growth is 79%, almost 80%. But until today, we still have 44% being coal. And that means this stands in a stark contrast to developed countries. In there are a lot of countries you found in the past very good financing solutions that were available for the last 10, 15 years, such as, for example, public-private partnerships. And I mean, all of us know that the Paris Agreement has not been done yesterday. So it means you're already a little late. I've myself been in this industry for almost 20 years, but I think last year with 2020, it was a big year of having 127 countries committed to net zero. And it's a very good step. It's the first step to see that that gap between different assumptions is closing and there's almost a global consent. So we have seen a lot of capital flowing in until the pandemic hit. And I think this was a good sign, but for sure now is not the time to track this. So we have a public-private partnership. That's a very interesting financial product where you match catalytic money and institutional money, and this fund will focus on non-OECD countries.
Excellent. Thank you. So, Stephen, what do you think might be some of the big regional barriers to accelerating the use of hydrogen in particular across borders?
I think probably it'll be incumbents who don't really want to see this move as fast as we need it to. And of course, they're placed regionally as well. So there's a very big trade in oil and in particular out of Australia in coal. Now, we could replace those with these other renewables probably within 30 years, but you know, when you've got huge amounts of cities and towns that are really relying on the likes of coal, then it becomes, you know, quite a big issue. In fact, I think you'll probably find that's what changed the election in Australia last time. So there's that. But I think there's very, very big advantages in us working together. And of course, it's great to have Mr. Lee on this call with us, because not only the largest rooftop solar business I'm involved in, we've just got involved also in the largest solar farm. And so we just need lots and lots of those solar panels. So maybe I'll have a chat to Mr. Lee after we finish today.
Sounds promising. Mr. Lee, so Stephen has touched on hydrogen and the role that it can play. There's both a supply and a demand side to that. You need to increase the supply of it, but you also need to increase the demand of it. And many of the assets in our economy don't run on hydrogen at the moment. So what role do you think green hydrogen can play in that energy transition in the APEC region?
And yes, I believe that during energy transition, hydrogen will be a secondary energy indispensable for decarbonization. And decarbonization needs to go beyond power plants. Non-electric applications also need to be decarbonized, including energy chemistry, steel making, construction materials like cement, as well as long-haul maritime and air transportation, and the utilities, especially district heating in cold areas. And all these sectors need non-electric fuels, and which must be produced with hydrogen as the medium. And now, the hydrogen power we use now, 96% of them is from coal or natural gas at the cost of carbon emission, which is called green hydrogen. And moving towards carbon neutrality, we must use solar or wind to make green hydrogen through water electrolysis. Only in this way can hydrogen be widely used. And in the Asia Pacific, we have abundant solar energy resources. In the future, we can install large-scale solar and hydrogen installations in North Australia, Chile, and New Zealand to produce clean hydrogen and deliver them to other parts of the world. It will not only help the world towards energy transition, but also revitalize the economy of these regions. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Lee. Dr. Spieth, coming to you finally, if you could give a piece of policy advice to APEC leaders to help accelerate the transition in renewable energy, what would it be?
Sure, yeah. So I think first, nobody can do this alone, yeah. So we see the wider gap between developing and emerging countries. So it's for sure about education and about this transition, what this entails, what it means if we don't do this at a specific timing, and upscaling people creating jobs. So sure, we should not leave anybody behind. So it needs to be a fair transition. And that means all of us need to be aligned, the public, private government, but also society. Second one, I believe that strong regulatory framework can, in addition to all the technology improvement, minimize costs. So good examples are big countries that have a stable but competitive framework. And this allows, for example, investors to price down the risk. And that helps for scale, which is another trigger to reduce overall costs. And then thirdly, we need creative solutions. You know, this is 30 trillion in 3 decades. The number is so big, it's difficult to imagine, but that means we still have a far way to go. And we need to be creative, because the solutions of the past in terms of financing will not be the solutions for the future. So we should think about public-private partnerships and other blended finance products.
Thank you for that advice. At the APEC Business Council this year, we had 3 particular work streams which can be found in the annexes of the ABAC report to APEC leaders. First of all, it is how we must go about leading through this transition. We not only have to mitigate our CO2 emissions, we also have to adapt to climate change in our region. But most importantly, we have to commit ourselves to a just transition. Ultimately, climate change is a social transition with an energy movement required. The second work stream that we looked at this year was the trade in renewable energy, in particular the barriers to the movement of hardware, software and energy itself. I'd like to thank our 3 speakers today for speaking on this topic. It is the topic of our time. It is one of the biggest challenges we face. And if we don't address it, our grandchildren will judge us poorly. So thank you very much to Sir Stephen, Mr. Lee and Dr. Spieth. And now I'll hand back to the studio. Kia ora koutou.
Okay, just say when. Right, okay. Kia ora tātou. I'm Mike Fuge, Chief Executive of Contact Energy, one of New Zealand's leading renewable energy companies. One of the major themes for the APEC CEO Summit is the future of energy, and I have no doubt the APEC region can lead the way in making the rapid changes that are needed across the global energy system. The question we ask is, how can Asia-Pacific economies be encouraged to move faster towards affordable, reliable, sustainable and modern energy? At Contact Energy, we believe that responding to the spectre of climate change is the biggest energy and infrastructure challenge we will face in our lifetimes. But wrapped up in the challenge are fantastic opportunities too. For example, here in New Zealand, we can become a trailblazer in the emergence of new global industries, such as green hydrogen, that can play an important role in contributing to emission reduction goals. The benefits that can follow include economic activity in the form of investment and jobs, reduced emissions in parts of the economy where such reductions are expected to be fraught, delivering a greener electricity grid and punching above our weight as we help overseas economies wean themselves off their heavy reliance on fossil fuels. Around 2/3 of global carbon emissions are energy related and emanate from electricity, heat and transport. Driving these emissions down via renewable electrification is widely accepted as the key method for delivering reductions. But there are significant hard-to-abate sectors, including chemical manufacturing, petroleum refining, steel making, heavy transport, shipping, air travel, and high-temperature industrial heat, where this is, quite frankly, easier said than done. We need to find environmentally friendly solutions for these hard-to-abate sectors. And across the region, we need to work together to help each other solve these problems. Today, I am very proud and privileged to be introducing the President of the Republic of Korea, Moon Jae-in. I do want to highlight and acknowledge the tremendous efforts that the Republic of Korea is already making in terms of their commitment to carbon neutrality by 2050. And there is significant investment, particularly in the green hydrogen research and development. As I mentioned, there are many challenges and opportunities associated with energy. And we look forward to hearing the President discuss the solutions and opportunities for the APEC region as we collectively take action on the energy transition towards renewables and net zero energy solutions. Please welcome President of the Republic of Korea, Moon Jae-in.
저신다 아던 총리님, 바바라 체프맨 의장님, 함께해 주신 CEO와 귀빈 여러분, 아태 지역의 혁신과 경제 성장을 이끌어온 APEC CEO 서밋에 참석해 에너지의 미래를 논의하게 되어 뜻깊습니다. 기후위기 대응과 아태 지역의 포용적이고 지속 가능한 발전 방안을 찾는 자리가 되길 바랍니다. 기업인 여러분, 기후위기 대응을 위해 우리는 적극 행동하고 긴밀하게 협력하여 탄소 중립 사회로 전진해야 합니다. 지금 우리의 실천이 인류의 생존과 미래를 결정하게 된다는 비상한 각오와 결의를 가져야 합니다. 이제 에너지원으로서 석탄과 석유의 역할은 더 이상 지속될 수 없습니다. 우리는 새로운 에너지로 문명의 대전환을 이끌어야 합니다. 태양광, 해상풍력 같은 재생에너지의 비중을 높이고 디지털 기술 혁신으로 에너지 효율을 높여야 합니다. 미래 기술과 산업, 새로운 일자리는 탄소 중립의 목표로부터 창출될 것입니다. 각국 정부와 기업이 에너지의 더 빠른 전환과 혁신을 위해 협력하고 경쟁한다면 인류는 새로운 문명으로 도약할 수 있을 것입니다. 중요한 것은 연대와 협력과 포용입니다. 협력 속에서 자유롭게 교역하며 공동의 성장과 번영을 목표로 하는 APEC의 정신이기도 합니다. 태평양 서쪽의 아시아 국가들은 배제하지 않는 포용의 정신을 중요한 가치로 여겨왔습니다. 코로나 위기 속에서도 아세안과 한중일 3국은 코로나 아세안 대응기금과 필수 의료물품 비축제도 등을 통해 이웃 국가들의 어려움을 함께했습니다. 한국은 RCEP과 한 아세안 FTA를 토대로 영내 국가 간 공급망 강화와 포용적 회복을 위해 노력하고 있습니다. 태평양 동쪽과 남쪽 국가들은 에너지 협력과 탄소 중립의 비전을 한 발 앞서 실천하며 지속 가능한 성장 방안을 찾아왔습니다. 중남미 국가들은 라틴 아메리카 에너지 기구를 통해 기후 위기 대응을 위한 에너지 협력을 강화해 왔습니다. 뉴질랜드, 캐나다, 미국은 2050 탄소 중립 목표를 담은 법과 제도를 선도적으로 제정했습니다. 한국 역시 탄소 중립 기본법을 제정하고 탄소 중립을 위한 국제 협력에 나서고 있습니다. 나는 오늘 한국 국민과 기업, 정부가 탄소 중립 사회로 전진하면서 지속가능 발전을 이루기 위해 기울이는 노력을 소개하고 APEC과 함께 나갈 포용의 방향을 제시하고자 합니다. 첫째, 에너지 전환을 위한 민간과 정부의 포용적 협력입니다. 한국은 석탄 화력 발전과 결별하고 있습니다. 우리 정부는 출범 이후 석탄 발전소 8기를 조기 폐쇄했고 다음 달 2기를 추가 폐쇄할 예정입니다. 또한 국내 신규 석탄 발전소 허가를 중단했고 지난 4월 신규 해외 석탄 발전에 대한 공적 금융 지원도 중단했습니다. 대신 안전하고 깨끗한 에너지를 늘려가고 있습니다. 2025년까지 태양광과 풍력 설비를 2020년 대비 2배 이상 확대할 계획입니다. 신재생 에너지의 발전 효율을 극대화하고 에너지 생산과 소비를 분산할 것입니다. 기업에 대한 지원도 강화하겠습니다. 한국 기업들은 탄소 중립 전환에 적극적으로 나서고 있습니다. RE100에 동참하고 재생에너지 투자를 확대하며 ESG 경영에 박차를 가하고 있습니다. 한국은 그린 인프라 구축에 520억 달러를 투입하고 기술과 금융 지원으로 산업계의 저탄소 경제 전환을 뒷받침할 것입니다. 맞춤형 기업 지원책으로 기업이 기술 개발과 투자에 나서도록 도울 것입니다. 특히 피해 산업과 업종에 미치는 영향을 최소화하고 신속한 업종 전환과 노동 이동을 지원할 계획입니다. 저탄소 전환 투자를 지원하기 위해 투자세 공제와 정책 금융을 확대할 것입니다. 둘째, 수소경제 생태계 구축을 위한 역내 협력입니다. 수소는 배기가스를 발생하지 않고 어느 국가에서나 얻을 수 있으며 화석연료보다 에너지 밀도가 높은 미래 에너지원입니다. 2050년 전 세계 에너지 비중의 13%에서 18%가량 차지할 것으로 예측되며 관련 시장은 연간 12조 달러에 달할 것으로 전망됩니다. APEC 국가들은 수소 경제 생태계를 구축하기 위해 협력하면서 경쟁하고 있습니다. 미국의 수소 프로그램과 호주의 국가 수소 전략이 추진되고 있으며 중국과 일본 또한 수소 경제의 기반을 다지고 있습니다. 한국 역시 2019년 수소 경제 청사진을 제시했습니다. 세계 최초로 수소법을 제정하여 범정부 수소경제위원회가 출범했고 기업들도 370억 달러 수준의 대규모 투자에 나섰습니다. 한국을 대표하는 기업들이 수소기업 협의체를 결성하여 수소의 생산, 유통과 활용까지 수소경제 전 분야의 협력을 모색하고 있습니다. 한국의 수소경제는 빠르게 성장하고 있습니다. 세계 최초로 수소차 양산에 성공했고 다양한 수소 모빌리티가 세계시장 점유율 1위를 지키고 있습니다. 세계 최고 수준의 한국 수소연료전지 기술은 역내 수소경제 생태계 성장에 기여할 것입니다. 한국은 2050년까지 그레이 수소를 블루 수소와 그린 수소로 100% 전환하고 그린 수소 생산을 획기적으로 늘려나갈 계획입니다. 수소 산업 전 분야에 걸친 기술 개발을 지원하고 국제 공동 연구를 통한 표준화에도 역할을 다할 것입니다. 세계 GDP의 61%를 차지하고 있는 APEC은 수소 경제 생태계 구축에 앞장서게 될 것입니다. APEC 청정수소 밸류 체인을 구축해 에너지에 있어서 새로운 아시아 태평양 시대를 열어가길 기대하며 한국도 적극 협력하겠습니다. 셋째, 국경을 넘는 나라 간의 포용입니다. 한국은 국제사회의 기후위기 대응에 적극 참여하고 있습니다. 녹색기후기금과 글로벌 녹색성장연구소를 유치했고 기후재원을 조성하여 이웃 국가들과 동행해 왔습니다. 지난 5월 개최한 P4G 정상회의에서 한국은 선진국과 개도국이 함께 동의하는 서울선언문을 이끌어냈습니다. 또한 지난 COP26에서 2030 NDC를 상향하여 온실가스 배출 정점을 기록한 2018년 대비 40% 이상 감축하는 강도 높은 목표를 발표했습니다. 메탄 감축을 위한 국제 메탄 서약에도 가입했습니다. 기후위기에 국경이 없듯 대응과 협력에도 국경이 없습니다. 탄소 중립을 위해 전 세계가 서로의 경험과 기술을 공유해야 합니다. 특히 선진국들이 개도국들을 적극 지원하고 협력하는 것이 무엇보다 중요합니다. 한국은 기후재원 지원을 계속하고 기후기술센터 및 네트워크를 통해 녹색기술 분야의 협력을 확대하겠습니다. 그린 뉴딜 ODA를 더욱 늘리고 Fit4G 민간 파트너십을 통한 협력도 계속해 나가겠습니다. 2030년까지 2010년 대비 신재생 에너지 비율을 2배 확대하는 푸트라자야 비전 2040의 차질 없는 이행을 위해 회원국들과 협력할 것입니다. 기업인과 기빈 여러분, 나는 오늘 에너지 전환과 탄소 중립을 위한 우리 모두의 실천 의지와 협력이 더 굳건해지길 바라며 그 협력에 북한도 참여하기를 기대합니다. 탄소 배출을 늘리지 않으면서 발전할 수 있는 길을 찾는 것은 전 인류의 과제이며 모두가 협력해야만 가능한 일입니다. 북한은 특히 산림 회복에 중점을 두고 있습니다. 동북아 산림 협력에 북한이 참여하는 것은 한반도의 온실가스를 감축하는 것은 물론 동북아의 평화와 번영에도 기여하게 될 것입니다. 산림 협력으로 평화를 이룬 다른 나라 사례가 많습니다. 한반도에서도 숲을 공유하고 함께 가꾸며 항구적 평화가 이루어지길 바랍니다. 우리가 에너지 전환을 통해 이루고자 하는 탄소 중립 사회는 지속적이고 포용적으로 성장하는 세상입니다. 세계 최대 지역경제협력체인 APEC의 역할과 책임이 막중합니다. 혁신적인 발상과 과감한 도전, 포용적 리더십으로 아태 지역의 경제 성장을 이끌어온 기업인 여러분이 탄소 중립의 문을 여는 주역입니다. 새로운 에너지로 만드는 새로운 문명, 바로 지금 우리가 시작합시다. 감사합니다.
Ngā mihi nui ki te ronga mō kapua o te ao whānui tonu. Our thanks to His Excellency Jae-in for his thoughts and his presentation there, and so many points that have come out of that presentation from him. Obviously, talking to the future of the need for the APEC CEO Summit going forward, but to particularly address things like renewable energy itself, quicker energy efficiency is required across the APEC region, and reinforcing, I think, the role that APEC has for the global community as well, and to continue that solidified, collectivized, inclusive approach that we have seen through the ASEAN nations that were mentioned there by Jae-in, but also the agreements, the support for the 2050 carbon neutrality approach New Zealand, Australia and others have taken. And obviously he also mentioned there the Freedom Work Act on carbon neutrality. And as was mentioned in his introduction as well, the research that has been done by Jae-in and his government, particularly with research into hydrogen, developing the Korean hydrogen economy, looking at transition from grey to blue and green hydrogen by 2050, a massive commitment there, and also the significant increase in production of green hydrogen technology going forward. So a very robust and informative discussion there from Jae-in. We've also got some comments coming in from all of you. Thank you again throughout the presentations that have happened today, for your comments. We really appreciate the fact that you've taken the time to share your questions and comments with us. I'll hand over, Rodini.
Ka pai. And so I'll read out a couple of the comments around the energy discussion, which we've just heard there. The APEC region accounts for 60% of world energy demand. This makes the region the power broker in the global swing to renewable energy, likely to spend over 1.3 trillion by 2030. Another comment, ngā mihi mo ngā kōrero for the kōrero. We're talking about renewable energy and hydrogen being shipped. What about the emissions factored in shipping these energy sources? Is this ironic, or how is this tackled? Another comment, Julian. The essential energy issues are access and quality of supply to ensure affordable, sustainable, reliable and clean energy into the future. And finally, on energy, business and government must work together to develop new technologies, share innovations and secure investment to accelerate this transition. What might that look like?
Yeah, it's been a big discussion today. That exact point, the need for business and government to work together, to share innovations, secure investment. I think that was also the thrust of Jae-in's presentation as well there, that there is a need for government and business to work together. There are more opportunities, I think, that exist than barriers that seem to be still existing at the moment, and so therefore the need for people to collectivise, as he said, to solidify, to work together, unify, mahitahi, as you've mentioned a couple of times already. I think that's really important. Also, just wanted to touch on one point. We had a comment come in from Andrew Naylor on sustainability, which I think is really makes a really valid point, a really interesting point, that the extra actives industry is hugely important to many APEC member economies. What is being done to harmonise standards across industries, and what is being done to help develop, particularly with the extra actives industry, the mining sector sustainability. So I think there's some really good questions that have come in all day, but particularly in the last two sections. Really appreciate you raising those questions with us. And as we've said throughout the day, if you are raising questions, it's also an opportunity for others, particularly the CEOs who are joining us today and indeed over the next few hours, over these 2 days of APEC CEO Summit 2021, to think about the answers for some of these questions as well, because the more we collaborate, the more that we organise and solidify together, then the more we can come up with the answers together as well, and the quicker we can expedite the answers to those questions and finding solutions.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing that's quite promising that I'm picking up on is that, you know, while we do realise, and it's a very, you know, scary reality that we live in terms of climate change, and, you know, there's the reports that have come out and saying that, you know, climate change will rise, you know, the temperatures will rise, global warming, in the next 20 years. But what I'm hearing and picking up on is that there are actually viable solutions and opportunities. Opportunities. It's not all doom and gloom, and there are actual leaders out there and business thought leaders out there who are making and taking the steps to, you know, to flip the script and do what's good for everyone, including our environment. Waianō. Let's bring in our host who we haven't heard from or seen for a little bit, Julian. Maya, how are you getting on?
Wow, what an inspiring day. I feel like I have learnt so much from our amazing speakers. I am enjoying the questions and comments coming through the platform. My virtual fingers are getting a workout.
You've done an amazing job. We really appreciate all the support that you've given as well, Maya, and flicking through those comments and questions to us. So tēnā koe, Maya, ngā mihi nui kia koe.
I may as well read one question out, and this is to do with Dr. David Suzuki's kōrero earlier on sustainability. E mihi ana kia koe, Matsua David Suzuki. Love your kōrero he pātai. A question for the governments of APEC. Are you listening to his kōrero? How are you going to level up on your response to the climate crisis? How are you being led by Indigenous approaches to being a kaitiaki, a guardian of the planet and people for collective benefit? Ka waiho kia koutou te rā pātai. I'll leave that with you. Waianō, if you're joining us live from Aotearoa, New Zealand, this is where Julian and I, along with Jack and everyone else here at Aotea Centre in Tāmaki Makaurau, Auckland, will leave you for today. We look forward to continuing the conversation with you, the kōrero with you, a pōpō, tomorrow morning. But if you're watching from elsewhere in the APEC region, we will be back with you very shortly.
Hydrogen appears to be the only viable alternative.
This will be the largest green hydrogen production facility in the world.
It allows us to produce it and export that renewable energy to the places in the world that don't have that opportunity. And so in terms of a globe and a global approach, it is going to be phenomenally important going forward.